afternoon, folks. I had a very busy week speaking with numerous clients and other folks, and I found it very interesting that this repetitive question and concern was brought up, and that is in regard to the debt ceiling. So I thought I would just provide a little bit of education and insight to an obviously potential problem that may be an ongoing issue for your portfolios. Even if the U.S. does avoid the worst case scenario when it comes to its maxed out debt, your portfolio could still feel the crush from the backup options. So here's how you can defend yourself. Right now, the U.S. is in a bit of a crisis. The country's debt is hovering right at that maximum debt ceiling level, and there's a decent chance that we're going to skim past the absolute worst case scenario. It's still a possibility though, as are a lot of the still not perfect backups. In any case, you'll want to be prepared for whatever happens. That's the reason we kind of bring these things to you. So what is this debt ceiling? Why it matters really to investors right now, and what each government solution would mean for the markets and your portfolio. First of all, what is the debt ceiling? Example, you've got a credit card. You're hopefully aware that it comes with a spending limit and it outlines the maximum amount of money you can borrow. Well, in the US, the government has something called, that's similar, it's the debt ceiling. Although it comes with a slightly higher limit of $31,380 trillion, about 1.5 times the size of the country's economy. That limit is set by Congress, which has the power to increase it if required. The reason the US government needs to borrow in the first place is that it spends more than it makes in taxes and other revenues. So after paying initiatives, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the military, education, transportation, those things don't come cheap. So to avoid all of that, the government then issues debt in the form of securities like treasury notes and bonds. It's not an easy fix though, because the government has to pay a ton of interest just to service its existing debt. The debt ceiling exists to make the government accountable for its financial decisions and to allow politicians and investors and onlookers to keep tabs on excessive government spending. For good reason. It's been shown that spending in excess may have nasty side effects. Slowing economic growth, raising interest rates, reducing the government's ability to respond to future economic downturns. Plus, when debt seems too high, investors may lose trust in the government's ability to keep up with its interest payments. So what's the big deal then? Well, Uncle Sam is a shopaholic and has already maxed out his credit card allowance in January of this year. Since then, the government's been relying on extraordinary measures, otherwise known as accounting tricks and cash balance, to keep up with the bills. Time's running out. It may exhaust all of its backup moves as early as June. Although the exact date would, of course, depend on how much the government has received in tax by then. So unless Congress agrees to raise the debt limit, or at least grant a temporary extension, the government would either face a default on its debt or be forced to implement severe reductions in state spending. And at that point, the situation could get really bad really quick. Partial government shutdown would lead to disruption and delays, maybe suspension of payments like Social Security, Medicaid, military salaries. It would affect millions of Americans. The economic impact could be staggering as well. The government may need to slice off payments worth around 10% of the economy, bringing an already struggling growth down by the high single digits. In the case of a slower protracted default, and over 1% in the case of a short default. That would almost guarantee a recession. It may also have longer term effects like undermining the US dollar status as the world's primary reserve currency and hampering the government's ability to respond to future economic crises or invest in essential public services and infrastructure. But the biggest impact of all could be financial. Any missed debt payments could lead investors to seriously question the government's creditworthiness. The U.S. lost its AAA rating in the last standoff in 2011. That doubt could wreak havoc on all important funding markets, which finance major institutions and raise volatility in almost all of the markets. And given today's extremely uncertain macro environment of already elevated interest rates, political tensions, those price moves could be a lot more extreme than the investors might expect. Now, how likely is that outcome? Well, the risk of doomsday scenarios never seemed so high. That's mathematically true, but we're likely to swerve that disaster. The stakes are just too high. So instead, it's more likely that the debt ceiling will eventually be raised and the government will just kick the can down the road, just as it's done many, many times before. But it's all down to timing. See, the reason the debt ceiling hasn't been raised already is due to politics in every sense of the word. The House of Representatives, which plays a crucial role in the legislative process, is currently controlled by the Republicans. The party can use its sway to delay any deals, while at the same time asking them for major spending cuts just that fit with his policy. But the Democrats, refusing to even enter the negotiation table so far, we're looking at a very dangerous game of chicken. So even if the risk of a drawn-out default is low, tensions are likely to ramp up as we approach that fateful date, with each party incentivized to make issues seem worse than they really are just to gain concession from the other side. That makes the short-term technical default a whole lot more likely and significantly raises the risk of higher volatility over the next several weeks. Now, that's not the only way it has to go down. Lawmakers could come in, they could I think it's called a discharge petition, to try and bypass the Speaker's approval. Although the odds of success would be slim, slightly more likely scenario would you see with Congress basically would buy more time by passing a bill to temporarily suspend the debt ceiling for several weeks or months. A more extreme or riskier option where the president could create a coin worth $1 trillion, deposit in the Federal Reserve, and use that money to pay the government's bills. So that's the good news. Even if no agreement is reached, there's really no guarantee that the government will default on its debt even temporarily. But let's face it, even if we do avoid the worst case scenario, the other options are hardly going to calm investors' nerves. Markets then, of course, will probably stay volatile until a more convincing solution is found. So what can you do to protect your portfolio? A non-resolution might not look likely, but it's still a risk worthy of protecting yourself against. Remember, any potential fallout could be huge, so volatility will likely stay high until the issue is properly resolved. Some markets are already reflecting heightened risks. Actually, investors now require higher yields just to risk of holding bonds that expire around the three most likely dates of a potential default: June, July, and October. Plus, cost of insuring against the U.S. government defaulting on its debt, which works using a derivative contract called a credit default swap, or a CDS, usage of these tools have spiked sharply recently. That being said, most markets appear to be underestimating the potential impact, with stock volatility remaining surprisingly muted so far, even with a down week again. That's 3 out of the last 4 weeks. If you have a truly long-term investment horizon and can handle short-term up and downs, your best options, maybe not doing anything, at least for now. But if you want to reduce the risk of a sharp loss over the short term, you've really only got a handful of options. The first things first, make sure you're neither too leveraged nor too piled into one investment. Ideally, you may want no leverage at all in a well-defined, portfolio made up of different asset classes, sectors, styles. If you want to be more specific against protecting against the debt ceiling, you could consider picking up assets that are likely to benefit from that tension. More importantly, though, is to not underestimate the risks around the debt ceiling, no matter what approach you take. You can hope for the best, but it's always, best to prepare for the worst. Most certainly if you're in preservation and distribution phase of retirement. You can't go adding losses into the mix with R&D, income, fees, taxation. You have to overcome all of those now with your hoped and planned gains, just to not cannibalize your principal. Ask yourself these 2 questions and give yourself honest answers. Number 1, are you properly allocated? You know with absolute certainty, for taxes, R&D, potential losses, that if this thing continues on a sideways or downward pattern for a while, like it did last year and it seems to be continuing this year, that you will come away unscathed. Number 2, Are you okay with losing more of your years of sweat equity and cash that you set aside and took home less to save just so you could have a peaceful retirement? If your answer to number one is you're not sure and number two is a definite no, then you most likely need to make necessary changes to your portfolio's diversification plan. Grant yourself some true peace of mind. Let's start with a 15-minute conversation. As always, our calendar stands available to help offer a voice of independence, reason, where we can help you properly protect, grow, satisfy your income needs, all within the proper foundation today. Just click our calendar link below and let's get you secure. We hope that this information today just serves you well as always, provides a proper educational premise, and gives you a stronger understanding of how these things can be problematic and potentially devastating to your portfolio. Folks, have an amazing rest of your weekend. We'll see you in the next episode. As always, thank you for tuning in. God bless all of you.